What on earth is this? This is Armenia. It's a landlocked country in the Caucasus, bordered by Georgia to the north, Iran to the south, Azerbaijan to the east and west, and Turkey also to the west. This is the very south of the country, near the town of Kapan, and it has nothing to do with the subject of this video, so I don't really know why I'm filming this. I just wanted to get this in the shot, because it's quite cool.
Right, well, now you know what Armenia is, I suppose you're probably wondering why I'm here. As mentioned by Road Trip Gabe, Armenia is a landlocked country in the Caucasus region that straddles Europe and Asia. It's a genuinely fascinating place with a remarkably rich history and a strong national identity. Despite numerous attempts at subjugation and assimilation over the centuries, some more horrifically violent than others, Armenianness as a concept has prevailed with flying colours, and the region has retained its cultural heritage through such things as its amazing food, unique music, and absolutely mental alphabet. But if you've spent any time on this channel, you'll know that food, music, and linguistics are of no interest to us and that we're here to see some trains, or in this case, a distinct lack of them. So we're going to hop back to the 19th century. Oh, boo-hoo, a history lesson, get over it. Armenia historically has been something of a flourishing cultural centre with a strong identity of its own, and over the centuries it has served as a regional powerhouse for education, the arts, and many more things. But geopolitically it could scarcely be in a worse location for not getting attacked and occupied over and over again, such as its location at the crossroads of Europe and the Middle East. As a result, following literal centuries of occupation, liberation, and reoccupation by a host of different warring factions and forces, the region then considered by some sources as historically Armenian, or at least being heavily populated by Armenians, ended up being split in two in the 16th century. The western half came under the control of the Ottoman Empire and mostly resides in what is now eastern Turkey, while the eastern half came under the control of Iran's Safavid Empire for a couple of centuries until the Russian Empire slapped them around and took it for themselves in the early 1800s. And the 1800s is where we're hitting pause on this frankly professorial deep dive on Armenian history. With Armenia's Russian overlords firmly in their railway era by the 1890s, they thought it prescient to build a big railway connecting some of the major cities in the area. So they built a big railway connecting some of the major cities in the area. And by 1899, a train line had opened connecting Tbilisi in Georgia, Yerevan in Armenia, and Baku in Azerbaijan. And it was commonly known as the Yerevan to Baku line. Sorry, Tbilisi. But at the end of the First World War, this region here, commonly known as Nakhchivan, was occupied by the Ottomans following the capitulation of the Russian Empire, before the Armenians then pushed back into the Ottoman Empire and retook control of some of the territory it had lost. Then, of course, Russia swooped back in, this time wearing a Soviet disguise, and invaded from the north and east and reconquered it, while the Ottoman Empire took this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stop existing. Everybody say hello, Turkey. The Treaty of Kars in 1921 froze the borders here, and after a complicated round of extremely controversial diplomacy that I do not want to wade into, the Soviets basically said, this is the Armenian SSR, and this is the Azerbaijan SSR. Oh, but this bit is actually going to be kind of autonomous because it's full of Armenians. Oh, and let's make this bit part of Azerbaijan. We are geopolitical geniuses, and there is no way this highly contentious decision will come back to haunt the entire region in the form of decades of ethnic tension and bloodshed. I believe that last bit was actually a verbatim quote from Lenin. Following the ratification of these weird borders, which handed Nakhchivan to the Azeri authorities and Nagorno-Karabakh to the Armenians, the Soviet Union basically took on the role of a strict, abusive parent who forced the two ethnic groups to quell their territorial beef and get along. And over the following 70 years, the underlying historical, cultural, and territorial tensions were not resolved so much as contained by Soviet governance, waiting for a spark to light the touch paper. But in the meantime, they had a sick transcontinental railway to use. And use it they did. The railway from Yerevan to Baku covered around 550 kilometers or 350 miles, with travel time between the two cities taking around 12 to 15 hours. It started in Yerevan, snuck over into Nakhchivan, then hopped back over into Armenia briefly, then headed back into Azerbaijan on the other side. And while the entire region was under Soviet control, this border-hopping journey posed few issues, as both sides were told to play nice by their overlords in Moscow. And when all is said and done, it's this little section down south that we're interested in, and is also what's prompting a 7-hour road trip from Yerevan across the extremely mountainous Sunik province to the river Aras at the very southern tip of the country.
I also have nothing of use to say about this place either, but I just wanted to film it because it's so pretty. I'm never going to get this road trip done.
The road down here is pretty spectacular. Rather than taking the less windy Google-recommended M2 highway route, I've gone down the Kapan to Megri highway, which runs parallel to the east. It's a remote, challenging but exhilarating route, taking in incredible high-altitude vistas of mountain ridges, beautiful villages, and enough thick diesel exhaust from Iranian oil tankers to take a few years off my life. Down here, the old railway line entered Armenia from Nakhchivan in the west and skirted along the Iran-Armenia border until exiting back into Azerbaijan in the east. Yet despite the Yerevan to Baku line being an enormous infrastructure project that once shuffled millions of people to and fro across the Caucasus, there's barely any evidence that there was ever a rail line here at all.
So, this is the border between Armenia and Iran. And the train used to come down through here alongside this road and the river. But obviously it's all gone now. It was all sold for scrap. And that way it would go down a few kilometers further and then turn north up towards Kapan. And that way it would go towards Megri and then continue on into Nakhchivan province of Azerbaijan.
Down here, where the railway intersected southern Armenia, there are a few tunnels dotted here and there, and there's a vague outline of a cutting where the tracks once sat, but that's about it. So what happened here? Well, all that ethnic tension that the Soviets had brutally suppressed over the course of its occupation of the Caucasus was always bound to return to the boil once the Soviet Union started to collapse. And blimey, to say it did exactly that would be an understatement. Prior to the dissolution of the Union, Armenia had started making eyes at the Nagorno-Karabakh region, known in Armenian as Artsakh, which had been part of the Azeri SSR but was 1. Dominated by ethnic Armenians and 2. Technically self-governing, as I said earlier. Ethnic Armenians in the region wanted it to be folded into the Armenian SSR, a request which was rejected outright by the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and was met with fury by Azeris who considered it their land, despite its autonomy and the prevalence of Armenians living there. Once the mediating force of the Soviet Union collapsed, however, tensions spilled over and a full-scale war between the newly independent nations of Armenia and Azerbaijan broke out, with both countries fighting for Nagorno-Karabakh. Editor Gabe here, any Armenians or Azeris or Russians or Turks watching this, please go easy on me. I'm just a stupid British man trying to make sense of this insanely complicated issue while also regretting ever choosing it as a subject. In the end, just to confuse matters as much as possible, by 1994 Armenia ended up taking de facto control of Nagorno-Karabakh under the auspices of the self-governing Artsakh Republic, despite it being surrounded by Azerbaijan on all sides. The Azeri territories in between Armenia and Artsakh were also occupied by Armenia, and the two regions were connected by a small road known as the Lachin Corridor, which was kept open by Russian peacekeeping forces. Fun fact, despite all this hassle, Armenia actually never recognized Artsakh, despite it basically being a part of Armenia. That's weird, isn't it? One of the casualties of this war was any semblance of diplomatic relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, with all borders between the two countries, including those between Nakhchivan and Armenia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan, permanently closed. And of course, this meant that the Yerevan to Baku railway was now surplus to requirements, and so was shut down for good. The physical line itself wasn't long for this world either. Within a few years of the ceasefire, almost every inch of the Megri stretch of the line across southern Armenia was ripped up by the Armenian Ministry of Defense, which then sold it to a metallurgical company in 2003. Safe to say, they clearly had no plans for the line to reopen. But there are a couple of sections of track here and there that do still exist, purely because the local authorities aren't sure what to do with them and they're not bothering anyone. And one of those sections is here, at the former Megri railway station, which for some reason is 4 miles outside of Megri and is actually in the town of Araksashen. I'll let foreign correspondent Gabe take it from here.
Yeah, I've got a selfie stick. What of it? So there's not a huge amount here. The tracks end literally just after that sort of crate thing, and then they turn into a sort of vineyard over there. There's about 3 trains left here. They all seem pretty industrial in origin. There's a statue over here, and there's a sort of that goes quite well with the sort of slight neoclassical vibe of the old station. So we've got this woman here, and then the old station itself has sort of neoclassical columns, although the main building is fairly sort of Soviet in style. This is the only place I've been able to film where border guards haven't rushed up to me and asked me what I'm doing, because it's quite hidden. There are no watchtowers that can see me from here. So if I wanted to flee into Iran, I probably could. Basically, it would be charitable to even say that the line ends here. It only really exists here. There's just about maybe a 10-meter stretch here with 1 train on it, and that's it. The rest is all gone. It used to run down this way, down to Megri, which is just beyond those mountains there, and over into Azerbaijan.
More border guards have stopped by my car. Oh no, they're moving on. Okay. Maybe they got word that the English dipshit is walking around with a selfie stick. The station building itself has been completely gutted and lies in total ruin. Despite serving literally the only town in this region, this was clearly never a major transport hub, and the station mostly sported a modest utilitarian design.
Oh, look. An old safe. Oh, look, an old plastic tub.
Side note, even when the rest of the country is freezing cold, as it is now, the area down by the Iranian border is weirdly warm, so maybe waiting outside would have been pleasant enough to endure, and thus they didn't need a big building. Either way, pointless tangent aside, this station and the dilapidated rail yard that sits in front of it is one of very few reminders that this was once a major transport route.
In all honesty, being here is a bit sad. To think that this was once this sort of incredible cross-continental railway that connected millions of people and encouraged closer ties between different ethnic groups and cultures and political alignments, and yet now, I was going to say lies in ruins, but it lies in non-existence. And that, I suppose, demonstrates how desperate the end of the Soviet Union was, the fact that every inch of this railway was scrapped, with the exception of this bit here. And I know it's less important, but another thing that really springs to mind is I cannot imagine there being a more spectacular train journey on Earth than this one. Any older viewers who went on the Yerevan to Baku line, tell me in the comments, because I want to know. I mean, this would have been just the most stunning train journey. This is an amazing corner of the world. It's off limits, as I've been told multiple times by Armenian soldiers. And on that note, I should probably get out of here.
The remains of the Yerevan to Baku line are a brutal symbol of both the passage of time and the seemingly insurmountable differences that have driven a wedge between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But despite me saying this is all that's left of the line, that's actually not true. The line originally split here, with one branch continuing into Azerbaijan down here near Megri, and with the other branch heading up north over the mountains to cross over into Azerbaijan in the border town of Kapan.
Which is here. This is pretty much all that's left of the track. It's next to a wastewater treatment plant, which smells absolutely foul. And I think the line actually continues a little bit further up towards the Azerbaijan border, which is about like a 10-minute walk from here. So let's go see that. In fact, what I should say as well is that behind the camera there is a big, the train station building, but it's currently being repaired into some sort of shopping outlet. And it's currently full of Armenian builders who probably don't want to be filmed at 7 a.m. So I'm not going to do that. Oh my God, it's so cold out here. Let's go see the rest of the track.
In fact, look, there's a shot of the top of the station building for you. Exciting. Right, so it turns out that the end of the line is so close to the Azerbaijani border that Armenian soldiers immediately came up to my car and asked me what I was doing. So using Google Translate, I had to explain it, and they looked at me like I was a maniac and very politely told me to go away. And they're still watching me in the rearview mirror, so I'm going to leave. But also, look, there are some remnants of the train line. It's very nice up here, at least. Well, that was a fun detour, wasn't it? I suppose the title I gave this video is a little clickbaity, taking the very familiar concept of an abandoned railway and spinning it into something unique or weird. But I suppose the destruction of the Yerevan to Baku line serves as an interesting example of the collateral damage dealt out by diplomatic disputes and war. Thousands were killed or displaced during the war in the early 90s, and that is obviously the most tragic part of all of this. But for two ethnic groups who once coexisted, perhaps uneasily, in an intermingled manner partly because of this railway, to turn around and shut each other out with such extreme finality has left millions of people isolated. Armenia, for example, had international rail routes in all directions from Yerevan for much of the 20th century, and now 3 out of those 4 railway lines terminate at Armenia's borders. The international route into Georgia to the north is the only one that remains. Armenia does have a modest internal rail network, owned and operated by Russia, but maintains the skeletal framework of an international railway network that it effectively cannot use. And that means that for those in towns like Syunik, Kapan, Megri, Tatev and beyond, not to mention those in Nakhchivan and western Azerbaijan, are effectively stranded, cut off from easy access to any major industrial centres and left to rely on winding mountain roads and an extremely unreliable bus network. The economic opportunities for those who live on the former Yerevan to Baku line were directly impacted by its destruction, and with the outbreak of more war and the retaking of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azeri forces, any hope of its reconstruction was completely dashed. And yes, that was actually on the cards. In 2021, shortly after the first Azeri offensive to retake parts of Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan met with his Azeri counterpart to discuss reconnecting Yerevan and Baku by rail, using the old line through Nakhchivan and Megri. Azerbaijan even started construction of new tracks on the Azeri side with the expectation that it would later be connected to the old line through Armenia. But following Azerbaijan's annexation of the rest of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023 and their displacement of all the Armenians who lived there, these talks appear to have been shelved indefinitely. Instead, Azerbaijan has now used the controversial 2023 peace treaty to propose the creation of the Zangezur corridor, which would establish a contiguous road and rail route through southern Armenia that connects Nakhchivan and Azerbaijan proper without Armenian checkpoints, similar to the Lachin corridor that connected Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia has also backed this project and pledged military protection for the corridor. Armenia, predictably, has been staunchly opposed to this plan, along with Iran, who doesn't want any trouble right on its border, and has instead refloated the idea of a regular cross-border railway, which has been met with dismissal by Azerbaijan. And so here we are in the present day. What an absolute mess. A disastrous series of conflicts has destroyed the infrastructure of vast swathes of the Caucasus, isolating ordinary people who just want to live their lives free of blockades, free of conflict, and free of bloodshed. I know it seems like a pipe dream now, but the fact that the reconstruction of the Yerevan to Baku line was floated by Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2021 despite literal war between the two is a testament to the line's iconic status and the importance it held in the region as both a diplomatic and practical tool. But now it's gone, and it's unlikely that we'll ever see it return. And that is pretty tragic.
Right, well, thanks for watching. I decided to show my face a bit more in this episode, partially because I bought this audio recorder, and partially because I bought the selfie stick. And also, because I was going to say actually, because this part of the world is so stunning, but that wouldn't require me to be in the footage, would it? Oh, whatever.